You are one of our guests within the Media Innovation Circle. I guess this is the 20th, so it's quite a rounded number for you, Dennis. Dennis is an associate professor of advertising and branding at the University of West London in the UK. We were colleagues a couple of years ago. We worked together in the provision of the advertising and branding courses. And he's been working recently into looking how advertising and the advertising world and agencies are using the digital work or the digital media and the digital technologies and the digital context, particularly with artificial intelligence, and how this is becoming something that we can use or at least reflect upon. So without further ado, Dennis, you are very, very welcome. Thank you for joining us today, for accepting this invitation. And the floor is yours. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Catarina. And thank you for everyone for attending the talk. When I received the invite to talk about advertising and the digital, my mind immediately went to all the crazy and out there emerging technologies that make the often fleeting stint in the advertising world, wowing marketing experts, getting the creative minds in advertising agencies racing and even breaking into mainstream media. New technologies can be fun and useful to enhance branded communication, but real economic demand is always needed to perfect and to push these technologies before they make it into mainstream and really have an impact on any kind of advertising research or landscape. Only very few technologies make it this far without fizzling out following their initial hype. This is unsurprising, with research by Kaspersky finding that more than 95% of technologies and technology innovations fail to even make it up to the launch. Those tech innovation that make it from launch into mainstream is even way smaller. A tech innovation, or rather tech evolution, that has recently grabbed the attention and imagination of industry professionals, researchers, and mainstream media is artificial intelligence and its possible implication for day-to-day life and businesses. Considering industry applications, advertising has perhaps a lot to gain from AI. Advertising's core activities are understanding consumer needs, matching them to product and services, and persuading people to consume. These are all capabilities that artificial intelligence can dramatically enhance. So it's not a wonder that in 2018, McKinsey analyzed more than 500 companies, and that showed that marketing, including advertising, was the domain where AI contributed the greatest value, according to industry professionals. Advertisers have been more or less embracing AI long before the latest mainstream hype around the topic. A 2019 survey by the American Marketing Association revealed that implementing AI had jumped 27% in the previous 18 months in marketing departments. And a 2021 Deloitte global survey of early AI adopters showed that 3 of the top 5 AI objectives were marketing related. If we're going even newer, a McKinsey study from this year, from 2023, stresses the advanced standing of AI in industry, with almost all surveyed marketing departments already using some sort of AI solution. And senior marketers, so executives that are actually making decisions for businesses, want their organizations to make even more use of these AI supported solutions, and in particular, generative AI. Marketers are particularly optimistic that this would positively impact a variety of tasks, but one that ranks particularly high on the wish list is the optimization of marketing communication efforts to get a better return on investment for marketing spending and advertising spending. A famous quote by John Wanamaker from the late 1800s state that half the money I spent on advertising is wasted. The trouble is I don't know which half. And more recent estimations puts that number actually closer to 90%. And one of the reasons for this is the steady increase of digital display advertising, those adverts that we all encounter online all the time. This might be at first thought a bit counterintuitive, as digital tech and advertising has always been heralded as allowing more meaningful targeting of audience by crunching user data in the background and thus ensuring that relevant exposure to suitable audience is pretty much guaranteed. But if you have caught yourself thinking lately that you're seeing more adverts with less relevance to you online, for example, when you scroll through your Facebook or your Instagram or YouTube or anywhere really online, you're not alone. This is unfortunately a trend. And while the exact reasons behind this are complex, three aspects are particularly driving this trend of really bad digital display advertising at the moment. Firstly, digital advertising has reduced the time and budget required to produce and run advertising campaigns. More than 90% of spending on digital display ads happen through automated systems now. Social media offers many advertising formats, from static text, videos, playable games, brand takeovers, custom fillers, you name it. And most are getting easier to buy. Many advertisers can now go online and set the budget for how much they are willing to bid through a platform's automated auction for a spot that reaches their target audience. This has lowered the entry barrier for who uses digital display ads. You no longer need to be connected. You no longer need to know exactly what you're doing. You literally just click 3 or 4 buttons and you're buying basically and placing advertising. As a consequence, this has lowered the entry barrier. And we're seeing more and more niche products flooding the advertising market with little to no meaningful targeting strategies, oftentimes just buying as much random media slots as their budget allows. For these advertisers, it is a numbers game, quantity over quality. If they contact enough people, someone will click on their adverts, irrespective of whether that person would normally be considered their target audience or not. This goes hand in hand with another trend that we are currently seeing, that is that many high-tier advertisers are exploring alternatives to the run-of-the-mill digital adverts that audience have grown somewhat numb to. So that means premium advertisers, those high-end brands, the ones that spend a lot, like Coca-Cola and so on, they're leaving. And with them leaving, that means there's even more opportunities for niche products to snap up digital display spots for cheap. And the third reason is down to recent privacy changes by Apple and other tech companies that have affected the ability of user data and thus advertisers' ability to track and better tailor their advertisements. And the worst is yet to come, with Google announcing to heavily restrict third-party cookies from 2024 on, starting with 1% of Chrome users in the first quarter and applying the new restrictions to every user by the end of 2024. There's so much digital and traditional advertising out there that isn't actually achieving what it's meant to achieve. Reducing waste in terms of advertising spending is understandably a key objective for businesses. One way to do this is by evaluating and optimizing adverts throughout the production phase, as well as pre and post launch, to maximize the appeal to target audiences and learn for future campaigns. The process of advertising evaluation has always existed in some form or another, be it in focus groups, surveys, co-creations, or media clippings. But the gold standard when it comes to evaluation advertising is eye tracking. Eye tracking has been an important source of information about perception and cognition for over 60 years. In the context of advertising, eye trackers are commonly used to evaluate the perception of promotional materials, such as the design of an advertising campaign or the brand's website. In addition to being perceived as positive or negative, an advert requires a certain level of attention in order to be part of any kind of consideration. Attention has therefore become a key concept in consumer behavior literature and is usually associated with how well consumers manage to maintain their concentration on specific stimuli within their viewing range. Eye tracking allows to measure this level of concentration by the monitoring of eye movements, gaze fixation, points of pupillar changes, and so on. Despite its clear and well-established benefits, research, including eye tracking, has not been as commonplace as it could be, neither in academia nor in industry. In a article, Funke and his colleagues provide a convincing list of factors that are probably inhibiting the wider adoption of eye tracking, including the limitations and challenges associated with eye tracking hardware and software, and with the resulting data related to volume, extraction, and interpretation, all requiring very well-trained staff to conduct meaningful eye tracking research. An additional consideration, and the one that I personally believe to be probably the biggest inhibitor for eye tracking playing a more central role during the production phase of advertising, is the cost involved. Eye tracker systems are pricey, and their prices typically scale with hardware capabilities and included software, and may range from thousands to hundreds of thousands euros, potentially putting eye trackers beyond the means of what advertising agencies and brands can actually afford. Thanks to technology innovations, there are some more affordable systems on the market, but Funke concludes that these more affordable systems produce a significant amount of low-quality, unusable data, and there's still a need for trained staff to cope with that data and work with it. This is where AI might come into play to facilitate technology-based evaluation and optimization of advertising, and replacing the complex and expensive need for real-world audience reception research. And this very long introduction brings me to the first project that I would like to talk about more in depth today. This research builds on and expands a very small scale pilot study of mine that I ran almost 10 years ago with a group of students in Germany. Since then, a lot has changed in terms of AI. This is a multi-institutional study, and it investigates ways as to how exactly AI might be able to help with the optimization of advertising, both in terms of industry application and in higher education for the purpose of educating students. In a first step, my team looked for automated software solutions that mimic the functionality of eye trackers based on AI. There are lots of programs out there and making some bold claims in this regard. Therefore, a key criterion to whittle down potential software solutions was that these needed to be either officially used by real-world brands or endorsed by industry-facing media outlets such as Wired, The Drum, Digital Marketing Magazine, or similar. They also had to be somewhat affordable to be also accessible for smaller brands and agencies. Using this approach, we ended up with 3 programs, namely iQuant, Fengui, and 3M Visual Attention Software, or short 3VMS. These selected 3 programs claimed that their services simulated an actual eye tracking study each time they're used, with a result accuracy of between 85% and 92% compared to that of sizable studies using real-life participants. While all 3 AI studies made some bold statements along these lines, no dedicated or publicly available peer-reviewed study could actually be found to back up these claims. Once we had chosen the AI systems that we would include, we set up this study design. Key aspects that needed consideration here were output comparability between the different systems, as well as the stimulus material that would be used throughout all experimental settings. This table here shows the different systems that we used. We conducted 2 eye tracking studies involving 31 participants each, using 2 different providers of research-grade eye tracking hardware and software, namely Tobii and SMI. The eye trackers were predetermined by availability at the participating universities in the UK and Germany. Participants were chosen to form a relatively homogeneous target audience profile. That means they we didn't really start with a particular outset of who we wanted to test or to target. We did it the other way around. We tried to recruit people that are in the same kind of spectrum, and then formed very kind of homogeneous target audience as subgroups within them. Following the recruitment phase, the eye tracking studies took the team around 1 week each to conduct. Looking at the capabilities of the AI solution, it became clear that we would not be able to run the full spectrum of tests available with an actual eye tracking system to compare all possible results. With a rather limited number of outputs option amongst AI systems, we had to focus the study on what we could compare, and therefore more sophisticated statistical tests such clarity. It's a good moment to mention that my team was not really 85 or 92% accuracy, which would be pretty much impossible to evaluate given the kind of output offered by the AI systems. Rather, we were interested in looking at the comparability of the conclusions that the output would allow to draw in terms of optimizing the promotional content. Our study was therefore about practicality of AI software for real-world industry use and applied research. So in other words, could current AI systems meaningfully assist consumer research in the process of optimizing promotional material? This approach seemed sensible, as none of the AI systems actually allowed us to look behind the curtain as to how exactly they arrived at certain recommendations. Given our research interest, we also included a final stage dedicated to the interpretation of the outputs provided by each device. For this, we handed over the final generated output to senior and junior marketers, that is professionals with more than 7 years and less than 3 years experience in advertising, and asked them to formulate their conclusions and recommendations for optimization based on the specific results in front of them. Now that the study design was set up, we focused on the stimulus material. Choosing this was pretty straightforward, to be quite honest, as many aspects were determined by choices that the team had already made up to this point. Firstly, we selected material that was supported by our eye tracking and AI systems. Therefore, we went with advertising and websites to be included. It should be noted that iQuant, which was one of the AI systems, only ever referred to website optimization on their own webpage, which is why we only ran iQuant as a part of the website experiments. Secondly, both websites and adverts were chosen to fit our audience profile. In other words, we only chose adverts and websites that would target the group of participants that we recruited for the eye tracking study. Lastly, we wanted to include different levels of visual complexity in the stimulus material. So we selected suitable websites and adverts that span from being rather simple with reduced design to being very complex and cluttered. To give an idea of how the protocol for each experiment looked like, I'm briefly talking you through the format of one, using the least complex advert as an example. We started by generating heat maps. Heat maps are often used in advertising research to analyze the attention that audiences pay to certain elements of an advert. They're usually the visualization of the sum of the viewing paths and fixations from all participants. They thus allow to provide a quick overview of overarching patterns and trends based on the overall accumulation of results. Based on the heat maps, the team then created a matrix, ranking the elements from those receiving the most to those that received the least attention according to each system. In the case of our advert, both eye tracking studies concurred that the key visual, the brand, and the product, that is the bottle here, received the most attention, with the key verbal, that is the headline on the top, coming in fourth. The two AI system also highlighted the key visual to receive the most attention. However, they pinpointed the center of the flower rather than the eyes as the most attention-grabbing element. This does not seem to be too much of a deviation, but one thing that we've noticed is in particular with the heat maps, is that the AI seem to always indicate areas close to the identified ones by the eye trackers, but slightly off, being within close physical proximity, but never completely spot on. The only real outlier was found with Fenggui's data, which shows that the QR code as the second most eye-catching element, which was rather surprising. We know from numerous previous studies conducted in Western countries, and probably also from yours and my own day-to-day experience, that no one really looks at QR codes in advertising. It's just like fine print in an ad that doesn't really get any attention by audiences. The second output that we produced were focus maps. Focus maps are essentially the inverse of a heat map, using similar data points, but visualizing these differently. The issue with heat maps is that the more fixation you have, the more the heat can obscure details on what people are looking at, as the splashes of color overlay the visuals. It can therefore be difficult to exactly pinpoint in the heat map what participants are focusing on. With focus maps, more fixation leads to clearer views of the element. Darker areas indicate fewer fixations, so that's quite straightforward. But as with heat maps, there's always a small underlying risk that peripheral vision might be ignored when interpreting the data. For our case, one of the AI programs did not offer a dedicated focus map. For the other systems, the two eye trackers showed that pretty much all essential elements received decent level of attention. Fengui once again emphasized the fixation on the QR code, which seems to be not really the standard kind of attention approach. As a third output, we generated gaze paths. Most eye tracking technology has the ability to connect fixations to provide the path a participant scans as they view the material in front of them. This allows the researcher to see what items interest the participant and when the participant is looking at them. In particular, the transition between different sections within the ad can indicate whether individual elements are arranged efficiently or whether there are weak points. If an element is fixated early on, it is usually better remembered and will achieve better recall results. In our study, once again, the two eye trackers resulted in pretty much the same gaze path. The very reduced plot produced by 3M VAS pointed into a similar direction. However, it indicated that while the headline is fixated in the middle, the brand name itself on the left might be lacking attention. Fengui introduced a very different path and, more importantly, lists the QR code as being fixated very, very early on again. Finally, we moved on to the AOIs, the areas of interest. These are particularly insightful as these feature various data points specific to defined areas. For example, the time until the first fixation, the fixation duration, the percentage of participants that fixate and revisit, and many more. The gaze perception percentage of an AOI can also reflect the importance of an element. More fixations on brand-related information can result in better brand recall and recognition afterwards. Deeper processing is also associated with longer fixation times, but of course, interpretation of each value is not as clear-cut. Confusing or very complex elements might also result in longer fixation times. Looking at our examples, the eye tracking studies and 3M VAS pretty much overlap in terms of fixation rankings and thus which element received the most attention, while the Fengui result deviated quite considerably. Now, after generating all of this kind of data, the maps and our matrices were shared with a number of junior and senior marketers to hear their interpretation of the outputs. We made sure that every marketer only received one set of data for each advert. So, for example, for the advert that we just saw, the marketer that would receive it would only ever get all outputs generated by a single system to keep the risk of system bias in the interpretation to a minimum. Based on the outputs from Toby, the advert for advert number one, the marketers were overall happy with the designs, as the heat map, the focus map, and the gaze path all indicated that all desired key elements drew a decent amount of attention. The marketers' takeaway was that audiences should have a basic understanding of the intended promotional message following a 3-second exposure, which is what we measured. However, after some more consideration, some of the marketers picked up a particular data point provided in Toby's area of interest analysis that indicated that the number of participants fixating the bottle was rather low. The majority of senior marketers thus came to the conclusion that the product should be probably more prominent as part of the design in the advert. All junior marketers stuck with the interpretation that no change was needed. For the second eye tracking device, SMI data, the interpretation was the same for both junior and senior marketers. They concluded that the product does not receive enough attention compared to other elements and suggested optimizing the design, for example, by better integrating the bottle into the average gaze pass. The first AI interpretation, so that of 3M VAS, resulted in a similar scenario to that for the Toby. Initially, both junior and senior marketers saw no need for any changes, as the AI software itself concluded that no redesign was needed. However, the comparable low attention on the bottle sparked some suspicion amongst professionals and led to the majority of senior marketers ultimately suggesting some design changes involving the product. The second AI system presented an interesting case in terms of interpretation, because strictly following the Feng Gui's insight and recommendation, the advert would require some major redesigns, with both brand and product needing more prominence to balance out the dominant QR code. However, both junior and senior marketers working with the data set questions the credibility of the QR code findings simply based on their experience. Interestingly, rather than just dismissing this particular result and using the remaining insight to arrive at conclusions, the marketers started to question the validity of all findings for this advert and did not want to base any recommendations on the dataset. So following the same protocol, the team then collected data for the remaining adverts and websites. Our takeaways for our studies so far, and I need to say that these are interim conclusions, as we are still working our way through the interpretations provided by our pool of marketers. The final results were presented at this year's UCO conference in Switzerland. Nevertheless, we definitely are seeing some trends already emerging. First of all, what we are seeing on the basis of the outputs from the different systems is that, at least on the surface, the presented outputs from AI and real-world eye tracking studies appear to be very similar. However, this is really just on the surface, as we could see in the case of the first advert already. Unsurprisingly, visual complexity impacts the accuracy of the AI results. However, this is not as straightforward as the more complex, the less accurate. There was no real pattern here, with material from all levels of complexity occasionally producing AI results that are close to those from the eye tracking study, with the only exception of the very high complexity ones, which both eye tracking and AI results really hated. There was also no clear winner or loser regarding the three AI solutions that we included in the investigation. Each system occasionally produced results very close to the eye trackers. One thing that can be stated for certain is that AI regularly overstates the level of attention, both in terms of elements that are fixated, as well as the duration of fixation. It also becomes clear that none of the AI solutions that we included accounted for social cultural aspects of advertising consumption. This resulted in misleading results in terms of elements that were fixed on and duration of fixation. It also raises the question of what actually happens to the alleged attention if obvious incorrect results are discounted. This question repeatedly came up amongst marketers who were unsure what to do and then questioned the accuracy of all results from this particular system. We also saw that the interpretations made by senior marketers based on AI output more often deviated from the actual final recommendation that the software were making for them. But by doing this, the recommendations made by the marketers actually ended up being closer to those based on the eye tracking studies. The junior marketers almost always followed the final recommendations made by the AI, indicating that experience might be a key to successfully working with automated software. We will have to wait until all marketer interpretations are analyzed to confidently answer the overarching research question, whether this can actually be used as a replacement for traditional eye tracking studies. But based on our insights so far, I would be probably reluctant to recommend any of the AI systems that we looked at for a broad implementation in industry or higher education. However, this doesn't mean that the AI systems are bad. In fact, I personally was very impressed, particularly comparing the results to those that my students generated 10 years ago. The future of advertising research will most certainly be AI supported. This is no longer a question of if, that's just a question of when. So the second project that I want to briefly talk about and wrap my talk up is also makes use of AI, but in a very different way. This project, with the name Pickled, illustrates another trend in advertising, that is the use of generative AI to create promotional content. As part of my job at my university, I regularly engage in knowledge exchange projects, that is, initiatives that run in partnership with industry. This particular case is an ongoing consultancy project for a North American food brand that wants to enter the UK market. This project has therefore been very much practice-led right from the start, and the use of AI was not planned in advance. Rather, it happened out of necessity. To provide a bit of context, the food brand wants to introduce a range of 3 kinds of pickled cucumber as a healthy snack option to the British public in 2025. In preparation for launch, in 2 years, the brand asked for more extensive market research. And for those in the audience who might not be as familiar with the process of market research, the outcomes are often rather dry and intimidating reports, trying to cram lots and lots of data into a single document. One of the big challenges for market researchers is to make the final result as easily digestible and visually appealing as possible, so that the client, and more importantly, the people working in the advertising agencies and marketing departments of the client, will actually read the report properly and use it to base their advertising strategies on. Usually that means that the market research team will write a short creative brief that summarizes some key points and offers some visual prototyping of advertising collateral to illustrate what the findings could mean and look like. In the case of the Pickled project, our team was pressed for time, and we did not have a graphic designer at hand to start prototyping some of our ideas of what we had found the branding and key visuals could look like. And that would have made it easier for the client and the marketing team to understand the strategic direction we were recommending. This is where AI software came into the mix. The team had already started writing the brand personas for the 3 different product lines of pickled cucumbers, with dill and garlic, those with kimchi seasoning, and finally those pickled with honey. If you're not completely sure about product personas, it's basically trying to humanize a product in order to make it easier to assign it attributes that you can use for advertising communication, or actually just connecting with the audience. Using prompts from these personas and flavor description, we started playing around with the AI software Midjourney, in the hope that we could create prototypes of characters to represent each pickle flavor. These are the results that we came up with in the end. Each illustration depicts the character in a cameo style portrait to keep to the brand's old school roots. In some of the illustrations, we also prompted the AI to include a selection of birds, as birds are symbols of good health, love, and truthfulness, all qualities that the brand wanted their new product line to be associated with. We also used color theory to inform our prompts for the AI. Once we were happy with the results, we started refining the brand personas to fully match the visual representations. Our mock-ups as part of the proposed brand guidelines went down very well with the client, and the project is now moving forward, basing the final brand designs on our illustrations created by Midjourney. Questions arising from this example are, for one, those concerning creative ownership and copyright. This is particularly important when there is an intention of commercial use of generative AI. Along with this comes another set of questions concerning the documentation and ability to recreate the designs, both important in terms of intellectual property and trademarks, as well as uniqueness. The creation of our product characters here was an iterative process of adding, replacing, and refining prompts in order to create the final outcome. When trying to recreate the images, the fastest we managed, even after many attempts, was 4 stages of prompts. That is, we started with initial prompts, followed by selecting one of the offered images, subsequently adding additional prompts to refine the image, selecting one of the new images, and do the same thing twice more. The team was unable to identify prompts for Midjourney to create the final images in just one round. This, however, raises the question of how these processes might be documented for industry as well as for research purposes going forward, and how to train professionals wanting to use generative AI for the creation of promotional content, and how exactly that could look like as part of a training. This is something I do not have answers to yet. However, I think that we will see an increasing demand to figure this out, with more industry professionals and academics starting to explore more useful applications of generative AI in advertising. And this brings me to my very last slide. I titled this talk, Advertising and the Digital, the Good, the Bad, and the Unknown. And I want to offer you my final thoughts in this 3-part format. Regarding the good, I think there's lots of good aspects that emerging technology and AI in particular bring to advertising. For one, it might be a way to reduce the waste of advertising spend, as I explored with the first project. This in turn would mean audiences will be targeted more meaningfully, and thus the trend of annoying and unsuitable ads online might be reversed eventually. Another good side to emerging tech and AI is that it makes it easier to interact with the audience on a more personalized level, really addressing the things individual groups care about. With lots of younger consumers now caring more about social causes and the environment, we will likely see more brands gearing their promotional efforts towards pursuing at least some social causes as well. This is definitely a future I'm excited about to look into and can't wait to see happening. Considering the bad, I think this is probably very easy to see. Emerging tech, such as AI, makes it easy for brands to collect and use all kinds of data to sell things everywhere, anywhere, at any time in the most efficient way. The transparent citizen has already been a reality for a while, but technology advances start to approach the wilder side of our imagination. The current developments in AI are fast progressing, and marketers might be too keen to implement underdeveloped digital technologies too early, simply because it's new and shiny, and rather than actually contributing anything that's sensible and makes better yet more responsible advertising happen. Recent studies have flagged up potential gender and racial biases in applications running on AI. This can potentially amplify a problem that most societies are already struggling with. And for brands, this can be a real world risk, with their crisis communication team better stepping up their game to be prepared. Lastly, the unknown. AI application is still in the infancy in advertising, and it is hard to tell exactly where things are heading and how to best implement the tech to truly benefit from it. More research and industry cases are needed to really provide some more answers to a lot of questions. The legal aspect regarding ownership and copyright might be one of the biggest question marks in context of advertising, but also how to train people and to adequately actually prepare them to deal with the generative AI and the potential problems that come with it. Another unknown is which system brands should invest in. There are lots of AI software currently competing on the market, and it's too early to tell which one is worth betting on. It can be a costly mistake if a system is chosen and implemented that ceased to exist in a year or two already. A big defining point will be how AI system will deal with Google's cookie policy in 2024 and going forward. Where will the new user insight come from? Or does this mean that whatever Google's backup AI solution is going to be the winner? These are just some of the unknowns that lie ahead of us, and that researchers and industry need to find an answer to. And that's it for me. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you. This was the really well-rounded communication. I want to thank you for the brilliant wrap-up. You know, you went back to the title and you explained us very well how you packed up the whole thing. I would like to open the Q&A now. We are still very much on time, so thank you as well for considering that and making sure that we are within the time that we agreed. Are there any questions from the audience to Dennis Olsen about the good, the bad, and the unknowns?
Too much questions.
Yeah, I have loads of questions.
Too much. I don't know.
I didn't want to start the questioning. My main approach for this, I don't work specifically in advertising. I work more with content, multimedia content. But of course, at the moment, all the people that I teach and that I work with, it's worried about the entering of generative AI. And as you were presenting all these cases and many of the cases that we have developed, I was more worried 4 or 6 months ago than now, because at the moment I'm seeing that the technology is coming to a sort of a wall, and I don't see it going too much forward than what he has already achieved. And so I still believe that even if a lot of companies will use all these technologies to produce low-level content, this will happen. This is already happening. We know it because we see it online. Most of the medium to high companies will maintain the need to hire very good communication people, communication design and advertising design, all these. So what is your feeling around this subject? What is your main idea about the maintenance of the people? Mainly I'm worried about this because a lot of people ask me, what happens to the people that are at the moment trying to choose their degree? What should they do? Should they still invest in design, in marketing, in advertising, or should they forget about all this?
I think that's a very good question. And first of all, I agree with you that I think the evolution...
Dennis, we don't have your audio. Can you go again?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I'm not sure whether I pressed anything.
No, it was me, actually.
Okay, good. So I think that's a very good question. And first of all, let me start with, I agree that I think the evolution of the technology has slowed down. I think we haven't reached the pinnacle of it yet. And I think one of the big turning points, as I said, will be once the cookie restriction are hitting on a big scale. I think there will be a complete rethink of how AI and any kind of emerging tech can actually feed its own kind of information source there. If you want my honest opinion about whether AI will replace people, I think it will replace tasks. It will not replace people. This is what we are seeing already, and as you rightfully say, this is already happening on a lower scale, in particular in social media marketing, for example. If I'm bringing it just back to my advertising kind of background, in social media marketing, content creation for social media campaigns and so on, a lot of it is automated. This doesn't mean that it replaced any jobs. What it did, it took away some very repetitive tasks and basically freed up supervision that comes in and more strategic thinking. And I think one of the things that we as people teaching in higher education and doing research for education in higher education, what we need to keep in mind is we need to prepare the next generation of how to deal with these things. And one of the things, and my hope is always that it's just the case in the UK. But one of the things that I notice in the UK is rather than embracing the technology and saying, look, this is not going anywhere, we have seen it coming already for a long time, we should now start to really engage with it, see where the benefits are, see where the risks are, and trying to educate our students for the next generation to really know how to deal with it. In the UK, education very much closes its eyes and tries to actually just keep it out of university life. I think that's personally, I think that's the wrong approach. I think the rightful approach is we should include it. We should have case studies. We should educate our students in knowing that part of their job will be to manage and to further apply automated software, AI software, any kind of emerging technology in their jobs later on. We will need designers because someone in the end needs to have a look through. The AI system will produce something for you. But even now with my second case, we now have designers basically refine it, bring it up into different formats and different kind of scaling it up as well for different media outlets that it's required for. So there's still a need for that. Does that answer your question? Perfect.
Other questions from the group? No? Shall I throw a question at you, Dennis?
Feel free.
Question.
I guess you will be expecting this one from me. On your first project, you presented that table with the changes to design recommended by marketeers.
Yeah.
So did you manage to speak to designers as well, as in terms of changes to design made by recommended by designers?
Yeah. That's actually quite interesting. So we had a mix of, I think the pool in total was 50 people that we had that were basically working with different things. And that was a mix of people that had a lot of experience with design in the advertising side, some people that literally were more on the strategic side. What we tried to do was getting a pool of a typical marketing department that you would have in a big brand or in an agency to do that. Okay. One thing, and again, I'm still trying to analyze some of the decisions that they're making and recommendations that they're making. But what I see in particular is that the designers are more critical of certain recommendations, and that's not depending on the system. So even when the eye tracking study told them that this part gets lots and lots of attention, the designers still recommended to make changes to them because they said it already gets attention, but it could get even more attention that you're getting there. So I think what we're seeing there is that, again, the experience and the background people are coming from might actually be the key to working with any kind of software and hardware to make it a successful kind of collaboration for it. And again, that brings me back to the first question. That means we need to educate the people to actually know how to work with them and give them the background and knowledge to do that properly.
Yeah, I asked this question because you had this ramp from, the way visual complexity was increasing throughout the 4 different stages that you guys picked. And it would be interesting to see how these recommendations change according to the level of complexity that is instructing whatever kind of evaluation is being done, either human or AI generated. So that would be interesting, maybe something.
That is actually something I should think about. Maybe we have time over summer that I can look that before I have to go to Switzerland for this.
Yeah, I think it would be an interesting add-on because there's actually an interesting aspect which has to do with visual communication principles.
Yeah.
That some people are more keen to very intuitively understand that possibly marketers are not. So that might be an interesting way to add on in terms of things like attention span and so on. Any other questions? I have 3 people in the room with me. All the others are no, actually I have 2 people with me. I'm one of them. All the others are somewhere else.
We are the ones who ask about the eye tracking use, because I wanted to ask about why are they using a lot of eye tracking?
Can you hear it, Dennis?
Yeah, but really ask a more
okay, yeah.
question.
Now it's cut out.
Connect your mic.
Yes. Acho que já está. Yes. Yes.
Sim, sim.
One of the questions that I had, sorry, but I took a long time to catch up. Was the use of eye tracking in terms to train the consumer eye. For example, as it is with the marketing industry, you tend to focus and compete the products in a certain place to keep their attention, and because we know they are going to look at this place. But if you have thought in terms of using the eye tracking to train the eye of the consumer to other places in order to ensure and train the user to be more aware of its consumption and look to other places and ensure the sustainability in terms of the consumption, product consumption.
So one of the things that this question goes in particular of the AI software, right? So
Yes.
yeah, so one of the things that we saw was that a lot of claims that were made was that the AI softwares were trained for hundreds of thousands of existing and publicly available eye tracking studies. Now, one of the things that needs to be quite clear is that eye tracking over the last so many years have come quite a long way. And one of the things, as you correctly say, is there's a lot of consumer training actually in there as well, in how we're gonna view something. It also depends on in the individual studies whether people are particularly aware what they're looking for, whether they were tasked with, for example, looking at something and getting some information, or whether it's something where you literally just surprise them, put glasses on like we did, and then basically they were looking at something in a very natural environment that they were trying to identify. So none of this information was actually available for the AI software, which means that when we tried to compare it in the laboratory or in our experimental designs, we stuck with what was best practice. So we looked at what was recommended in the literature as like the typical best practice case at the moment that is the most natural consumption of advertising or any kind of form of media. And with the AI study, so we tried to do basically something where we tried to create a particularly natural environment. Whether that worked or not is a different question. But one of the things that I need to emphasize with this study is we were not that interested in. Originally, we wanted to see whether any of the claims actually were true. So whether when they said, "Oh, we are just as good as eye tracking, we're doing exactly the same results." Originally, that's what we wanted to test, and we figured out quite quickly that that doesn't work, because the AI didn't give us enough information how they actually train people, how they actually analyze things, and so on. So we moved our attention away from saying, okay, we're not looking at the technical side anymore. We're looking at what are you actually trying to do with the insight. You're trying to make your advertising better. You're trying to get your communication better across. So that's why we then introduced that final step where it was about interpretation, where it was about, if I give you all of that information, what do you make of it? And that's why we created very similar kind of sets of design. Does that answer your question?
Yes, a little bit. I was also curious of which metrics beyond the fixations and saccades do you use, if you use, for example, the pupil diameter, as well with the measures of combining with other sensors?
We actually did. So we did a full spectrum of what the TOBI and SMI offered us. That was the typical standard to create the areas of interest, so AOIs. So that means I've listed that somewhere. Let me just have a quick look. That was the minimum, and that included, for example, pupil distance, but it also was here fixation times initially, fixation duration, fixation counts. The SMI also did returns, so how often actually people returned in their gaze for it as well. It was pupil size and movement for it as well that was calculated. Originally, we also took measurements of skin basic resistance. However, the more we read about international standards, we realized that over the last 10 years, less and less studies are doing that. And our fear was if we're including it, the AIs might have not used studies that basically used this before. So we kind of started to lose those halfway through our tests. Okay, good, perfect.
Okay, will you? we just need to switch off every time someone comes in. Dennis, before we put an end to this, half-a-minute question for a 1-minute answer. Do you think we are at a stage in which A/B testing, which is something that is very common in advertising, but also in the realm of digital communications and UX and UI design, do you think we are at a time in which the A version can be done by humans and the B version can be done by AI?
I think we're very close, yes. Surprisingly close, to be quite honest. As I said, I was actually, and this is something from this very short kind of overview, it almost looked like that the AI is not doing a good job. I was thoroughly impressed by the outcome, in particular, looking at what my students originally documented from 10 years ago. This has gone very, very close. I think where we are now actually is we need to see how to interpret the analysis properly. So the A will be done by a designer as a suggestion. The B will be done by AI. But the output, in order to get B then ready to go to market, needs again an eye of someone who basically just checks for it. And I think that's the one we need to train now. I think that's something we don't have. And this is something I'm realizing as part of this study, that marketers are really struggling to kind of make sense out of it. They rely on their experience rather than actually relying on what's being said in front of them. And I think that training is now required. And once we have that training, I think we're very close in there almost. Yes.
Great, as I thought. Okay, we like to be British, so it's 3:30. We need to put an end to this. Thank you, Dennis, again. This was great. Thank you very much for accepting this and for making this talk. It will be available in our website soon. So it will be something that you can share. And as I told you, something that you could, use for other purposes. Who knows? This is a private joke we have. Not joke, but kind of serious business. Thank you again. I hope you have a lovely rest of the week, and we'll catch up soon.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Bye.